Yesterday, the conference that we're at up in Manford, all about elders and leaders in the church and things like that, there were some statistics that were mentioned that really struck me, and I took a picture, so I've got it on my phone here. It was a research poll done by Gallup, which I didn't realize they did a lot of religious stuff. It's usually, you see all the polls, and maybe you've had one come your way or somebody call. But this one was about engaged Christians versus other Christians. And the way they defined engaged, if I understood correctly, was the people that go a little beyond just showing up on Sunday. That people who really believe this, it kind of gets into their lives. They're here a lot, they volunteer, they do things. Christianity is kind of part of life. And the difference in what their lives and the things they do are like versus everybody else. And a few of them struck me. First of all, the engaged Christian is 10 times more likely to invite someone else to church. 10 times, which kind of blew my mind a little bit to think of that. The engaged Christian, or if we want to think of it in the terms that we're going to talk about today, maybe the Christian who has active faith, is 3 times more likely to be happy, not at church, but in life. And that one really struck me, because I have been, since days of youth ministry, preaching this message of, if you live the way the Bible tells you to live, it's not even just that it gives you a better relationship with God or makes you a part of the church. Your life itself will actually be better. And I have truly believed that for a very long time, and Gallup apparently has proven it to be true. The average person who has an active faith is 3 times more giving than one that does not. And maybe I should have said this before the contribution, I don't know. But you're more likely to give, you're more likely to give more, you're more likely to give more frequently. And that's not even just here at church. You give to other things and other ways and give of your time. And the average person of active faith does 2 to 3 more hours weekly serving and doing things for others than other people do. Which all of those things sound like pretty good things to be, don't they? We want to be people whose faith is active, and James in James chapter 2 talks a lot about that idea and what that may look like. So James, we'll begin here in chapter 2. We'll begin in Ephesians, then we'll come to James 2 here in a second. Ephesians, you have Paul's version of faith, and then we're going to look at James' version of faith, and how it seems like they almost contradict, but they really don't. So Paul in Ephesians says this, chapter 2, verse 8 and 9, he says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." So Paul says you have been saved by grace, it's through faith, and it's not because of what you're doing, because if it was, then you would say, well, look at all that I've done, and it's resulted in my salvation, and how great that is. Then James, in James 2, says this, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith, but does not have works? Can that faith save him?" So Paul talks about you have been saved by grace through faith. James talks about, and that it's not by works. James talks about having faith without works, and how does that work? Can that faith save him? And my question when I read the two is, well, which one is it? And if you're a Bible skeptic, these are probably the kind of things that you pull out of context, out of Scripture, and say, see, the Bible contradicts itself, you can't trust anything it says. And I'm here to tell you today that it doesn't. And when you look at the teachings of James and you look at the life of Paul, I think you see them doing the same thing, but understanding what it all means. The IVP Bible Background Commentary says this, James uses words like faith differently than the way Paul does, which, by the way, is something we still have now. It's almost like we have to define terms. One of the speakers yesterday at this conference talked about the way we use literally. Nowadays. And usually when you hear someone say literally, whatever follows is anything but literal. It's an exaggeration of some kind. They use this word differently, but neither writer would be opposed to the other's meaning. Genuine faith is a reality on which one stakes one's life, not merely passive assent to a doctrine. And too often we have made it into that, something that is passive. Faith, in the way James talks about it, and really in the way Paul talks about it too, is not passive. This is not something we just fall into and then everything is kind of, we believe and you should see that somehow, but yet actions don't always match. Faith is active. When you believe, when you have faith, it changes what you do, it changes who you are. So continuing in James 2:14, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him?" Jimmy Allen, I think I've shared this quote with you before. When I was in his Romans class, he said this: "We are not saved by faith plus works. We are saved by faith which works," or maybe faith that works. If you have faith, it's going to cause things to happen in your life. Your belief is going to change what you do. Verse 15, "If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warm and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? If you know there's a need and someone comes to you for help and you just say, 'Well, good luck with that,' what good is there to that?" An act of faith helps beyond words. We are to be people that don't just say the right things or believe the right things. We're to be people who do those things. And so when someone comes to us and they need help, we're people that want to help instead of just saying, well, good luck with that. We're people that don't just think the right thoughts, we do the right actions that follow those right thoughts. We want to be people whose help goes beyond just the words that we say. Because when you have been on the other side of that and truly in need of some sort of physical help, the words, although they may be well-meaning and may be kind, you need something more than that. You need true help. Verse 17 says, "So faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." So an active faith promotes life, or a word I really like that I've come across quite a bit in reading lately is flourishing. It takes me to Jesus in John chapter 10, where he says that he wants us to have life and life to the full, or life abundantly. It's not just a life that's adequate, it's not just a life that is alive, but it's a life that flourishes. In our faith, we want things to go well for others, for the people within the church, for people we encounter, in our own families, in our own lives. We want a flourishing kind of life. And as we understand in everything else about life, you have to do things to get there. You have to prepare. You have to take actions along the way to make sure that happens. So I knew we were going yesterday to drive almost 2 hours to Manford in the morning, and I knew the chances of finding gas stations at 5:20 in the morning are probably pretty slim, and so I got gas the day before because I thought, I'm going to be ready just in case I'm the one who drives, and I drove, and I was ready for that. And all along the way, I'm observing the things around me and acting based on what I see. And it's just, we adapt to things in life as we see the need for that. We see the need to act based on the things we believe. Spiritually, it's the same thing. This faith that we have is something that's not just talk, it's action. And then it's something that is really trying to do the best in life for ourselves and for others. Continuing, he describes this, I think, throughout the book of James. So we're going to back up to chapter 1 and see if some of what he describes an act of faith looking like. He says this in verses 19 and 20. "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." So we're to be people who are listening and listening patiently. And I, for one, am not always good at that, because sometimes I'm already building the response in my mind and I may not hear the last few things that were said. Sometimes I might be defensive. I was thinking of the lady I was talking to at Walmart yesterday about where are all the cashiers in here? And immediately the defensiveness kind of puts up a wall where you don't want to listen. And I think I do that too. There are times where I have in mind what this should be and someone tells me something different and I don't always listen the way that I should. We are to be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to become angry. We're to be patient with people around us the way we would want them to be patient with us. Why? Because we have faith. Because this is what we see Jesus do throughout Scripture, is it not? As he encounters people that give him every reason to not be patient with them, and he has compassion on them, and he loves them, and he helps them, we are to be people who listen and listen patiently. Not listening with what is my response going to be? What is my debate in this going to be? But a listening to truly understand where someone else is coming from, what someone else thinks, what they feel, what they believe. We listen and we listen patiently. James 1:21 says, "Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls." Put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness. We're to be people who are changing who we are There we go. We're to be people who are self-aware of who we are and not willing to just do the things that the world around us wants us to do. There are so many opportunities in this life to react. We can react in so many ways, and people around us will feel like it's fine because that's what they would do too. I think we have seen that very clearly in culture over the last week, as a lot of very intense things have happened within our world, and a lot of people have reacted and spoken very quickly and later realized maybe I'm saying things in a way that I shouldn't say them. We need to be people who are careful about the way that we react and reacting in love. And then the next verse said, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. So that self-awareness makes us understand that my actions and words need to match up. I need to be someone who, if I am preaching, if I am teaching, if I am explaining to people that I love Jesus and I follow him and I'm a member of the church, then the actions that I have need to show that too, not just the words. And I have to show love for people that are difficult, as we've talked about recently. I have to be willing to serve people that may not be appreciative of the service that I'm bringing. There are all kinds of things we do in life because we are self-aware of who we are as Christians. And he describes in that chapter also that when you're not like this, you're like someone that looks in the mirror and turns around and looks back and doesn't remember what you looked like in the first place. That seems kind of crazy. And yet there are a lot of people in our world, and sometimes us, if we're honest with ourselves, who are really not self-aware of who we are, of how we come across, of how people see us. We need to be people who represent God and represent him well. Verse 26, he says, if anyone thinks he is religious, and by the way, that used to be a positive thing back in the days of James. Now if you say you're religious, the world around us gets so aggravated about a religion and think it's wrong. And I've even heard Christian people say that. I like Jesus, but I don't like religion. And I think you might not have read the same Bible I read because that's not how religion is described. If anyone who thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, that person's religion is worthless. Active faith causes us to speak carefully. And my guess is this is probably a challenge to most of us, unless you are a whole lot better than I am. Because there are times I speak before I think. There are times I speak and the thing I'm trying to convey is not what I'm trying to convey. There are times when I speak and I have not considered the way this may be taken or how it may affect someone. There are times I speak out of anger, and I'm not being slow to speak and slow to become angry. There are all kinds of times where the things I say get me into trouble and tear other people down. We have to, as Christians, as people who are religious, speak carefully. And again, as you think about all of the things going on in the world around us, we have daily opportunity for this, to be people who speak carefully and choose our words well. Verse 27, he says again, religion, not in a bad way. He seems to think this is a good idea. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this. And so if you were to ask the world around us, how would you describe religion? I'm going to guess they would pick 1,000 things that are not on this list. Religion, those are people that think they're better than you are. Religion, those are the people that want your money. Religion, those are people that they don't like anybody in the world, and they hate people, and they're trying to tell you what's wrong. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. If we are people who have active faith, we are people who remember those that others might forget. And I believe James here lists orphans and widows because of the place he is and the things going on in his culture. But I think there are a lot of different groups of people we could probably put into that same space. I think of, after going on that civil rights tour a few weeks ago, religion for Christians in the South back in the 60s should have looked like looking out for the African Americans around them and not doing what they were doing. Religion in our own part of the world here in Oklahoma should have been thinking of the Native Americans who were around people at different points in history and even today, and looking out for them. Religion nowadays, a lot of things. We care for the unborn because that's not a big thing in our culture to care for the unborn. We care for people who are forgotten. We care for people who are homeless and in need. We want to care for the people that the world around us does not care for. And maybe at the top of the list for us is just people who aren't like us. I don't know who you put in that category, but sometimes you have difficulty understanding, at least I do, people who don't have the same values, people who don't come from the same backgrounds. And James would say to us, religion is looking after the needs and the concerns and loving people who are like that, people within those groups. So we remember those who others might forget. In chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, he says, if you really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show partiality, and Jeff was getting a little ahead of me on Wednesday night, if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. If we have an active faith, we do not discriminate. You are not of more value or less value to me based on what group you're a part of, based on how you have interacted with me, based on whether you have been kind to me or not, or agreeable to me. You are valuable to me because you are a child of God, period. We do not discriminate in other ways beyond that. So we don't look to rich or poor, who can give us something and who can't, or who is of more value to us because of what they've done. We look to everyone as a valued child of God. Verses 10 and 12, he says, for whoever keeps the whole law but fails at one point has become guilty of all of it. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not commit murder. If you do not commit adultery but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. If we have an active faith, we are going to be people who respect others. And so he lists a couple examples here, but you'll notice the commonality in adultery and in murder is its interactions with other people. You are to treat other people well. Treat other people as we looked at in the Sermon on the Mount on a Sunday evening a couple weeks back. Treat other people as we would want to be treated. We are to respect and love others because of the faith that we have. Verse 19, you believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. And I have, like probably a lot of you, read this verse a lot of times. You've probably heard this taken out of context a lot of times. And I think to myself, if we are going to be okay with the idea of belief or faith that just ends with, I believe Jesus is the Son of God, and that's it, then we hold something in common with someone we don't really want to hold something in common with, because that's where they stop too. Even the demons believe and shudder, but they're not changed by it. They're not different because of it. If we have an active faith, this is something that sets us apart. It's not just to say that Jesus was a good man and a good teacher. It's not even just to believe and to confess and even to be baptized and then for life not to be any different than it was before. The belief that we have changes us, sets us apart. Or the word that James will use, it justifies. It makes us something different than we would be otherwise. And then he tells the story of Abraham, which I think is really interesting. And just a couple of verses, kind of a little brief thing. But when we think back about Abraham, and this will probably be a covenant that David gets to here in a week or two. When we think about Abraham, we think of all of the things he did. We think of this man who was told he's going to be a father in old age and his wife in old age, and these things happen. We think of a man who even before that, God says, I want you to get up and go. And the first question most of us ask is where? And he doesn't ask. He just gets up and he goes, and God takes him somewhere. When that son finally comes along in his old age, God says, I want you to take that son out to the mountain and I want you to sacrifice him. And it makes no human sense whatsoever. And he goes out there and is ready to within his faith, and he is stopped by God because God knows he is faithful. And at the same time, we do not see someone who's perfect all the time. We see a guy who comes into a land where he's worried about his safety and tells his wife to lie and say she's his sister, which is kind of true in an Old Testament kind of way. But there's all this with Abraham where it's not always faith, but yet overall there is this faith that shows. And then James says in verse 24, you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So if Abram says to God at the very beginning, I believe that I can leave here and go, and then he goes back to bed, or if Abram says to God, I believe that, I can go and sacrifice my son and you'll bring him back, but is not willing to actually do any of those things, it's not faith that is active. If we are to be people who have an active faith, we're to be people who have this declaration of faith and what we believe. It comes out of our hearts. This is a declaration from our hearts into our action. Believing is a great place to begin. But if we are not active in that faith, we're not people like Abraham, who is described here. And then he tells the story of Rahab. And the stories of Abraham and Rahab, kind of back to back, are a weird thing. But if you remember back to Old Testament days, the spies go to spy out the land, and Rahab protects these spies, gives them a place to stay, and hides them away. She is a prostitute in a foreign land who seems like about as ungodly can be, and yet God uses her within this plan. And she could say, I could hide these spies, and I believe it'll all be okay, but if she doesn't actually do it, it doesn't matter. It's just words, and our faith goes beyond words. And then he says at the end of that, in verse 26, probably one of the most familiar verses to us in this chapter, for as the body apart from sin, the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. And I believe James throughout this chapter has been just kind of escalating the words he uses until he reaches the point of saying, if you say you believe, but the things you do don't show that you believe, that's dead. That's not something that is alive. An active faith is a faith that brings life. And to take us all the way back to Ephesians 2 where we started, we are saved by grace through faith. It brings life not just here, not a life that is truly better here, as I think the polls show, apparently, but a life that is better in eternity. And today, if you do not have that life, this is a day that you can choose to take what you believe and put into action in life. And you can say that you believe in him and confess his name, be baptized into him, and your life can begin to be a life of active faith. Or if for too long you've just shown up. And please don't get me wrong. I always hesitate on sermons like this because I don't want the result of it to be, well, I'm just going to quit showing up then. If it's all that and they don't want me to just show up, we want you to show up. But we want you to have something that is greater than that. I think showing up can make your day better. I believe an active faith can make your life better and can make the life of the church better if we are all active in the faith that we have. And if you don't have a faith that is active in life, you can do something different starting today. You don't have to wait for New Year's for a resolution. You can start today to live in such a way that the people around you wonder, what is going on? What is different about them? Why do these things matter? If God matters to you, change your life today in whatever way you need to. If there's some way we can help, please come while we stand and sing.